The night my wife told me to sleep at the elevator, I didn't argue. I just nodded, the way I'd nodded through 34 years of marriage whenever she decided something for both of us, and I drove out past the county line with the radio off. Thinking about how a man could spend his whole life being careful and still end up standing outside his own front door at 62 years old. It started 6 weeks earlier when my father died. Congestive heart failure, slow enough that we all had time to say goodbye, and fast enough that none of us really did. He was 89, a man who'd spent his whole life around grain, first as a hired hand-loading boxcars, then as the owner of a small elevator operation on the edge of Larkspur Hollow, Nebraska, back when family elevators still meant something, before the co-ops swallowed everybody. He didn't believe in flash, he believed in ground you could stand on and hold in your hand. When the will was read, my brother got the ranch, 640 acres of irrigated pasture near the river, a renovated farmhouse with a wraparound porch, cattle already on the land. I got the old grain elevator itself, the actual structure, 90 feet of rusted corrugated steel leaning slightly east, sitting on 11 acres nobody had farmed in 15 years. My brother had leaned back in his chair at the lawyer's office and said, "Dad knew you'd want something you could putter around in." No offense, but that place hasn't turned a profit since Reagan was in office. He meant it kindly, or at least he meant it like he thought was kind. My brother has always had a gift for saying cruel things in a gentle voice and calling it honesty. That Saturday, he threw a party at the ranch. Not a small one. He'd been talking for a year about turning part of the property into an event venue. Weddings, corporate retreats, that kind of thing. And he'd brought in investors from Omaha to walk the grounds and hear the pitch. My wife and I were invited the way you invite family you feel obligated to invite. We stood near the back porch while my brother walked a cluster of men in quarter zips through his vision, gesturing at the barn he planned to convert, the pond he planned to stock, the authentic prairie experience he planned to sell for $4,000 a weekend. One of the investors, a woman in a blazer that cost more than my truck, turned to me at some point and asked what I did. "I'm retired," I said. "Quality control, mostly. Aerospace fasteners." She smiled the polite smile people give you when they've already decided the conversation is over. My brother caught it and laughed. "He also owns half the family real estate empire," he said, gesturing toward the horizon, though the elevator wasn't visible from anywhere on the ranch. The other half being a rust bucket you can see from the interstate if you know where to look. Laughter. Not cruel exactly. Worse, casual. My wife didn't defend me. She adjusted the strap of her sandal and said, "Well, at least one of the boys knows how to build something people actually want to look at." That was the moment, not the elevator, not the will, not even my brother's joke. That sentence, said lightly, like it cost her nothing. Later that night, after the investors left and the caterers packed up their folding tables, my wife and I stood in my brother's kitchen while he poured himself a bourbon he didn't offer to share. She'd had 2 glasses of wine and the honesty that comes with it. "You barely said 2 words all night," she said. "Nobody was talking to me." "That's not true. That woman asked what you did and you gave her a 4-word answer about bolts, fasteners," I said. "And what was I supposed to say? That I inherited a building nobody's used since I was in my 30s. You could act like you're proud of something, for once. Your brother's out there building an actual future and you're standing in the corner like a man waiting for a bus. I've paid the property taxes on that elevator for 6 years. Your brother-in-law hasn't put $1 into it since Dad passed the keys over. That's different." "How?" "Because he has vision," she said. And there it was, the word again, the one I'd been losing arguments to for a decade. You know what people see when they look at you? They see someone who double-checks the receipts. Somebody safe. Nobody builds a legacy on safe. I kept this family solvent for 30 years being safe. "You kept us small," she said, and I felt that one land somewhere behind my sternum, the way certain sentences do when they've clearly been sitting loaded for a while, waiting for the right moment to go off. I didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything left to say that hadn't already been said in some form, over some years in some kitchen. She looked at me for a long moment, not angry so much as finished, the way you look at a math problem you've stopped believing has a solution. "If that elevator means so much to you," she said, "go sleep there tonight." She didn't shout it. And then she walked past me toward the guest room where we'd planned to stay, and I understood I wasn't invited to follow. I stood in that kitchen a minute longer, listening to my brother out on the porch, telling one of the caterers a story about the investors, laughing at his own punchline before he finished it. Then I got my keys off the counter and I drove. The elevator was 40 minutes out, past the last gas station with an actual person working the register. out where the county road turns to gravel and the fields go dark all at once because there's nothing left to light them. The old access gate creaked when I pushed it open. The elevator itself stood against the night sky like something out of another century, which it was. My grandfather had poured the concrete leg back in 1962, and my father had run grain small operations like his obsolete sometime in the 90s. I hadn't been inside in years. The door groaned on its track. Inside it smelled like dust and cold concrete, and underneath that something faintly mineral, almost metallic, that I didn't have a name for yet. I found a folding chair in the old scale house and a wool blanket in the truck, and I sat there in the dark for a while, not sleeping, just listening to the building tick and settle the way old structures do at night. Around midnight, I got up to walk it off, and that's when I saw the envelope. It was taped to the inside of the scale house door, half hidden behind a faded county map. A property tax notice, stamped 2 weeks earlier, the kind of thing that gets mailed automatically whether anyone's paying attention or not. I peeled it loose and read it by phone light. Most of it was the usual boilerplate, but down near the bottom, under a section marked Water Rights Classification, someone had typed, Senior Appropriative Right, filed 1962, active, subsurface aquifer access, non-agricultural use designation, Larkspur Hollow Water Compact. I read it 3 times. My father had never once mentioned water rights. As far as I knew, the elevator had never used more water than a garden hose could provide. Non-agricultural use. I sat with that for a long time in the dark, the tax notice folded in my jacket pocket. And something in me, the part of me that had spent 30 years finding the one-line item in a 100-page audit that didn't reconcile, started paying very close attention. I woke before sunrise, stiff from the folding chair, to the sound of something humming faintly beneath the concrete floor. Not machinery. Nothing in that building had run in 15 years. I pressed my palm flat against the floor near the old scale pit and felt it. A low, steady vibration, barely perceptible. The kind of thing you'd miss entirely unless the building was otherwise dead silent, which it was. I spent the morning doing what I do, which is read things carefully that other people skim. I drove into town, pulled the original 1962 water rights filing from the county recorder's office. A woman named Bettina Cross ran the desk, patient enough to dig through the older microfiche when I explained what I was after, and found a document that named my grandfather as the senior rights holder on an aquifer that ran beneath 11 acres of what was now my elevator property. Senior water rights in Nebraska aren't decorative. In a drought state, in a region where 3 counties had been fighting over allocation for a decade, a senior appropriative right filed before most of the modern compact agreements meant you were first in line always, no matter how dry the year got. But it was the second document that stopped me cold, a lease agreement filed in 1998, the same year my father had expanded the elevator's footprint. A regional beverage bottling cooperative called Prairiewell Springs had leased subsurface access rights to draw from the aquifer beneath the property, paying an annual royalty that escalated on a schedule, structured to run for 50 years. I did the math on my phone sitting in the recorder's office parking lot. The current year payment, if it had been paid, would have been just under $200,000. I called the number listed for Prairiewell Springs from the truck. A woman named Naomi Kestrel answered, cautious in the way people get when a stranger calls asking about decades-old contracts. I'm calling about the aquifer lease tied to the old Larkspur Hollow elevator, I said. Parcel 411. There was a pause. That account's been flagged internally for years, she said. Payments have been routing to an escrow account pending confirmation of ownership. We reached out to the estate attorney of record more than once. Nobody ever called us back. I'm the current owner, I said. Or I think I might be. You think? It's complicated, I said, and it was. Here's what I found out over the next several days. Sitting across from my father's longtime attorney, a sharp, unhurried woman named Priscilla Vance, who'd handled his affairs for almost 25 years. The estate hadn't formally closed. Nebraska probate law gave my brother and me joint co-executor status until the county court signed off on final distribution, which hadn't happened yet. A formality nobody had bothered to explain to me in plain language, because nobody expected it to matter. The will named me as sole beneficiary of the elevator parcel outright. But until the court finalized that, my brother, as the more actively involved co-executor, had legal standing to market estate property to potential buyers, contingent on the eventual distribution order. He couldn't complete a sale without my consent and the court's approval, but he could absolutely start shopping it around, get a buyer lined up, get a number on paper, and pressure the timeline, which it turned out was exactly what he'd already started doing. He came to see me last week, Priscilla told me, folding her hands on her desk. Asked about clearing the elevator parcel for sale. Said you'd have no objection, since the building was, in his words, dead weight. He didn't mention the water rights. He doesn't know about the water rights, she said. Your father kept that lease compartmentalized on purpose. He was worried about exactly this. Someone liquidating the property without understanding what was underneath it. The royalty payments have been sitting in a dormant estate account since he consolidated his finances 5 years ago, pending confirmation of who the property would ultimately belong to. How much is sitting there? She checked a folder. A little over $600,000 across 5 years of escrowed payments. I sat back in the chair. $600,000 had been quietly accumulating under a building my wife had called worthless in my brother's kitchen 4 nights earlier. Can he sell it without disclosing the lease? I asked. He'd be required to disclose any active encumbrance to a buyer conducting proper due diligence, she said. If he doesn't, and it surfaces later, which it would because Prairie Well Springs isn't going anywhere, he'd be exposing the estate and himself to a serious misrepresentation claim. I thought about that for a while. If I wanted to make sure the water rights specifically stayed separate from any land sale, I said slowly, clean, documented, no ambiguity, how would that work? You'd want your brother as co-executor to formally acknowledge in writing that the subsurface water rights are excluded from any marketing or sale of the surface parcel, she said. Given that he doesn't currently believe those rights have meaningful value, that shouldn't be difficult to get him to sign. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that. I felt something quieter, something closer to gravity settling into place. My brother called me that evening, the kind of call where you can hear someone's confidence 3 sentences ahead of what they're actually saying. I've got a guy interested in the elevator property, he said, no greeting, like always. Ag Investment Group out of Lincoln. They want to raise it, put in equipment storage for a custom harvesting outfit, offering $310,000, I repeated. For 11 acres and a condemned grain leg? That's generous, Mike. He caught himself, laughed. Sorry, force of habit. That's generous, and you know it. I haven't agreed to sell anything. You don't have to do anything. Just don't get sentimental about a building Dad barely used the last 10 years of his life. I need this closed before the estate goes to final distribution. Cleaner that way, one less asset to untangle. And frankly, the taxes on that place are only going to keep eating whatever it's actually worth. What about anything under the ground? I asked. Utilities, easements, that kind of thing. A pause, brief, dismissive. It's an old elevator, not a missile silo. There's nothing under there but dirt and whatever pipe Dad ran for the old washdown system. Have you had it surveyed? I don't need a survey to tell me a building's worthless, he said. Look, I need something from you. If we're going to close fast, I want the surface rights and structure formally cleared in writing, no encumbrances, nothing complicating a title search. You sign off that anything not specifically part of the physical structure, subsurface, mineral, water, whatever legal boilerplate the buyer's attorney wants, is retained separately, so the sale can't be challenged later on some technicality, purely a formality. I almost laughed. He was asking me, unprompted, to do exactly what Priscilla had said I'd want done, draw a hard line between the surface and whatever ran beneath it, because in his mind that line protected him, not me. He thought he was covering his own liability. He was handing me the aquifer. Send me the language, I said. I'll have it reviewed. You always do this, he said, some irritation creeping in now. Slow everything down with lawyers and paperwork. I clarify things, I said. That's different from slowing them down. He sent the document the next morning. He'd clearly had someone draft it quickly, competent enough to be binding, sloppy enough to reveal he still didn't understand what he was excluding. It stated that any sale of the surface parcel would exclude all subsurface rights, water rights, mineral rights, and associated easements not expressly part of the physical structure or equipment retained by the current title holder of record pending final distribution. Priscilla read it twice, the second time slower than the first. He's excluding the water rights from the sale entirely, she said, and attributing them by omission to whichever heir is confirmed as the title holder for that parcel. Which, per your father's will, is you. He doesn't know that's what he's doing. No, she agreed. He doesn't. We had it notarized 2 days later at a coffee shop near the courthouse. My brother in sunglasses he didn't take off indoors, signing without reading past the first paragraph the way he'd signed things his whole life, trusting that someone else, usually me, had already checked the details for him. There, he said, sliding it across the table. Congratulations. You're officially the sole proud owner of a rust pile nobody wants. Thank you, I said, and meant it, though not in the way he heard it. That afternoon I drove back out to the elevator and walked the perimeter slowly, The way you'd walk a property you were finally seeing for the first time, even though I'd walked it 1,000 times as a kid. Near the old scale pit, half buried under packed gravel, I found a steel access hatch, maybe 3 feet square, bolted down and stenciled faintly, Prairie Well Springs. Wellhead access off, personal only. I didn't open it that day. I sat beside it for a long while instead, listening to the same low hum I'd felt through the concrete that first night. And I thought about my father, a man who never once, in 89 years, told anyone more than they needed to know, who'd apparently spent the last years of his life quietly protecting something he knew the rest of us wouldn't understand until we had to. I called Naomi Kestrel back the next morning. She confirmed what Priscilla already suspected. 5 years of escrowed royalty payments, north of $600,000, pending confirmation of legal ownership, plus an active lease with 32 years remaining on the term and a 5-year escalation clause that would nearly double the annual payment by the time the lease matured. There's also a standing buyout option, she said. The cooperative's board reviews it every few years. If you wanted to sell the water rights outright instead of continuing the lease, current valuation would put that somewhere around $4 million, given projected regional demand and the rights seniority in the compact, $4 million. I sat with the phone against my ear in a building my wife had told me to go sleep in like it was a punishment, and I said nothing for a moment because there wasn't anything worth saying yet. I'll want to think it through, I told her. Can you send me the full payment history and the current lease terms? Of course, she said. Take your time, mister. I'm sorry, I never got your name. I gave it to her. It felt strange saying it out loud in that context, like I was introducing myself to my own life for the first time in years. My brother found out 3 weeks later at the title company, 40 minutes before his buyer was supposed to close. The office overlooked the grain terminal on the edge of town, all glass and clean carpet, designed to make transactions feel simple. My brother arrived first, loose and confident, joking with the receptionist. His buyer, a lean, sunburned man named Foster Lindquist, who ran the harvesting equipment outfit, shook my hand and said something about how you never know what's sitting on a piece of land until somebody bothers to look. He had no idea how right he was. We sat down. Documents came out in neat stacks. Foster's attorney, a careful man in his 50s, went through the title report line by line, and about 10 minutes in, he stopped. There's a reference here to a subsurface water rights exclusion, he said. Filed by the co-executor, retaining all subsurface, water, and mineral rights separately from the sale. My brother waved a hand. Boilerplate. Standard exclusion language. My attorney threw it in to protect the estate from liability. There's nothing down there. Old wash pipe, maybe a cistern. Is there an active lease associated with this parcel? The attorney asked, looking at me now, not my brother. I met his eyes. There is, I said. Active water rights lease, senior appropriative right, filed in 1962, currently generating royalty income under a 50-year agreement with Prairie Well Springs. Payments are current. My brother's head turned toward me slowly, like the sentence took a moment to fully land. What are you talking about? He said. It wasn't a question so much as a demand that I be wrong. I slid a folder across the table. The recorded 1962 filing, the 1998 lease, 5 years of escrow statements, the buyout valuation letter from Prairie Well Springs. Foster's attorney read through it in silence, the room getting quieter with every page he turned. This can't be right, my brother said. That thing's an empty grain elevator. It hasn't run since the 90s. The elevator hasn't run since the 90s, I said. What's underneath it has never stopped. Foster set his pen down and looked at my brother with the flat expression of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about a deal. You represented this parcel as unencumbered, he said. Clean title, no active leases. It is clean, my brother said, and I watched the color start to leave his face the way it does when a man realizes the ground under an argument has quietly disappeared. It isn't, I said quietly. And you're the one who insisted the exclusion language be added. To protect the estate, he snapped. Not to hand you an oil well. It's not an oil well, I said. But you're not wrong that it's worth protecting. Foster's attorney closed the folder. We can't proceed on today's terms, he said. This changes the valuation of the entire parcel, and frankly, gentlemen, it changes who you should be negotiating with. He looked at my brother, not unkindly. You sold him more than you realized you had. They left within 10 minutes. Polite, professional. Already recalculating whether they wanted the deal at all once the water rights weren't part of it. My brother sat across from me at the empty table for a long moment, the confidence drained clean out of him. You knew, he said finally. I read the documents, I said. That's all I've ever done. You could have told me before I signed. I told you to have it surveyed. You said you didn't need to. He put both hands over his face for a second, then dropped them. 310 was going to clear the loan I took against the ranch to build the venue. He said quieter now. I was counting on it. That was the first time I understood how deep he'd already dug himself in, chasing his vision, betting against a future he hadn't confirmed. I didn't feel vindicated hearing it. I felt tired, the way you feel after carrying something heavy for a long time and finally being allowed to set it down. I'm not going to bail out a loan I didn't take, I said. But I'm not going to pretend I don't understand the position you're in either. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'll talk to you when I'm ready, I said. Not today. He left without saying anything else. I sat alone in that glass conference room for a while, watching the grain terminal cranes move slowly against the sky, and I thought about how strange it was that the two of us had grown up under the same roof, learned the same lessons from the same quiet man, and come away with such different ideas about what mattered. Prairie Well Springs called that afternoon. Naomi Kestrel. Warm now instead of cautious. We'd like to schedule a formal meeting, she said. Confirm the ownership transfer on our end. Discuss whether you'd prefer to continue the lease or consider the buyout. I told her I needed a few more days. My wife came out to the elevator that evening. I hadn't invited her, but I wasn't surprised to see her truck through the gate either. She stepped carefully across the gravel in shoes that weren't built for it, the sun low behind her, throwing her shadow long across the concrete apron. Your brother called me, she said. Said you're sitting on some kind of water fortune out here. Something like that. She looked up at the old elevator leg, rust and all, the way you look at something you're seeing correctly for the first time. I thought this place was worthless, she said. I told you to sleep here like it was a joke. I remember. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. You meant it, I said. Not sharp, just honest. You just didn't understand what it was going to turn out to be. Neither did I, for what it's worth. She was quiet for a while, arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill coming off the flatland. I've been thinking about what I said. About you building small. I heard you the first time. I was wrong, she said. I think I confused quiet with nothing. That's on me, not you. I didn't answer right away. There's a particular kind of silence that isn't cold, just careful. The kind you sit in when you're deciding whether an apology is the beginning of something or just the end of an old argument dressed up nicely. I let it stretch a little longer than maybe I needed to. I know, I finally said. I'm not asking you to fix it tonight. She nodded, and something in her shoulders eased slightly, like she'd been braced for a harder answer. We stood there together as the light went orange, then gray, the cranes at the grain terminal blinking their warning lights against the coming dark. I met with Naomi Kestrel and the Prairie Well board the following Monday. They laid out both options clearly, a lump sum buyout of just over $4 million for the water rights outright, or continuation of the existing 50-year lease. Current annual payment $208,000, escalating on schedule, 32 years remaining on the term, fully transferable to my estate after I was gone. I did the math slower than they probably expected, out loud, the way I'd done math my whole working life, checking every column twice before I trusted the total. A lump sum sounds enormous sitting on a table, but a senior water right in a compact this contested wasn't going anywhere. If anything, scarcity was only going to push the value of continued access higher, not lower, and a $4 million check invested conservatively wouldn't outperform $200,000 a year. Guaranteed, growing on schedule, for 3 decades, with the underlying assets still intact at the end of it, for whoever came after me. I'll keep the lease, I told them. No buyout. Naomi smiled, the kind of smile people give you when they've been quietly hoping you'd land somewhere sensible. Most people take the number in front of them, she said. I spent 30 years checking other people's numbers, I said. I know how good they look up close and I know how they look 10 years out. This one looks better 10 years out. The first quarterly payment landed 6 weeks later. I didn't buy anything with it. I put it where it belonged and let it sit, the same way my father had, quietly, without announcement. My brother and I talked again eventually a couple of months on, not at the ranch, not at a lawyer's office, just at a diner off the highway where we used to stop as kids on the way to visit our grandparents. He'd sold off part of the herd to cover the bridge loan, scaled the venue plans back to something he could actually afford without leveraging the whole ranch. He looked older than he had at the party, tireder. I keep thinking about what you said, he told me, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table without drinking from it. That you clarify things. I always heard that as an insult, like you were saying I was sloppy. I never meant it that way. I know that now, he said. Took me getting embarrassed in front of a room full of strangers to figure it out. You didn't get embarrassed because you're careless, I said. You got embarrassed because you never had to be careful. Dad made sure of that for both of us in different ways. He just never told either of us which way was which. He almost laughed at that, a small, tired sound. You going to gloat about this for the rest of my life? No, I said. I'm going to let it be what it is. You made a mistake chasing something you thought would make people take you seriously. I spent 30 years being careful because nobody was taking me seriously anyway. Neither one of those is a crime. They're just how we ended up, where we ended up. He nodded slowly, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the silence between us didn't feel like a scoreboard. The elevator still stands out past the gravel road, leaning slightly east the way it always has, rust and all. I never tore it down. I had the old scale house repaired instead, put a real door on it, cleared out enough space inside to keep a workbench and 2 folding chairs, and some evenings I still drive out there just to sit and listen to that low hum under the concrete, steady as ever, 31 years. And counting left on the lease. My wife and I are different now, not fixed exactly, but honest in a way we weren't before, which might be worth more than fixed. She stopped by the elevator again last month, unprompted, just to see it in daylight for once. She stood where the old grain chute used to run, and said she finally understood what my father must have seen in a building that looked, to everyone else, like it wasn't worth the taxes. I told her he probably didn't see anything special in the steel or the rust. He just knew what was underneath was worth protecting, and he trusted that, eventually, if he waited long enough, the right person would be quiet enough to notice.